In this video, I'm going to tell you why too many rules changes too quickly aren't good for Warhammer 40,000. A few weeks ago, some new kind of sweeping rules changes came out for the new edition of Warhammer 40,000. And when I say new edition, I mean this most recent version of 40K, 10th edition, was just released at the beginning of June, barely 3 months ago. There was a points update and some other update documents that came out before this in July or August, not nearly as big as this new points update, and the rules changes weren't nearly as monumental, but it seems as if 40K is a constantly moving target now, and I gotta be honest, I'm not really a fan of it. So now we're looking at 3 new downloadable documents, a balanced data slate, which is basically an errata. There's like a bunch of things to be changed or replaced kind of, in the core rules. Then there's a Munitorium field guide, which is the points list. Why can't Games Workshop just name things so that they make sense? You know what I mean? Like, new players have no idea what each of these documents should contain from the dumb made-up names that they've done. And even veteran players like myself are, frankly, kind of befuddled by the whole concept, right? But nonetheless. And then the third thing is there's a rules commentary, which is kind of like an FAQ. Again, the same kind of naming problem. So let's start with the points list, or as it's called, the Munitorium Field Manual. The points update previous to this that I have seen was kind of slight in comparison to this update. This version is called version 1.3, which leads me to believe that there was a 1.1 and a 1.2 update before this one. I assumed they started at 1.0 when it first came out. That means that I've already at least missed one, or potentially their numbering convention for versions is weird. That happens sometimes too. They show the changes from the previous document in the new document by printing the new stuff in red. And this new document is filled with red. Some points are up and, some points are down. Adjusting points values on units is generally a good way to fix issues with units in a game like Warhammer 40,000. If a unit seems too powerful, then you, the game company, increase the amount of points that it costs to field that unit in an army. If it seems underpowered, then the points cost should go generally down. This is all certainly nothing new. What's new here is the frequency in which the points changes are coming down the pike. I don't think a higher frequency of points changes is actually good for most players. As an example, the Manticore I built and haven't even gotten to paint yet for my upcoming 1,000 point Astra Militarum list has gone from originally at the 10th edition launch costing 105 points to then 125 points to now, with the newest list here, 150 points. This is mainly in response, I believe, to the indirect fire rules on the Storm Eagle rockets, which mostly tournament folks believe to be far too powerful of a weapon ability. Again, changing points on a unit-by-unit basis is the correct way to fix these issues, but again, it seems like it's happening too quickly. Then there's the balanced data sheet that makes changes not to point values on units, but actually changes the core rules themselves, which affects all of regular 40K, and also Combat Patrol, as Combat Patrol also uses the 40K core rules. It also makes some non-points related changes to some of the indexes as well, this balanced data sheet, Now, it's not a massive document. It's like 3 pages PDF, but really only about 2 pages of text if you take out the pictures and stuff like that. But it makes some pretty hefty changes to the way the game is played. And the fact that this is happening so quickly also could be troublesome. Devastating Wounds is a weapon ability that is used kind of throughout the game by many different units. It has, in this situation, been changed a bit, but also just clarified as well, which, kind of helps to end arguments about how the rule actually works, hopefully. That's not too drastic, but there are other changes, like the pretty massive change to the stratagem called Insane Bravery that drastically change some of the flavor and function of the game. And though change isn't the worst thing in the world, I do wonder how often it'll keep happening in the future. An example. The previous insane bravery stratagem was something that you paid 1 command point for, and it would make it so that a unit that had failed its battle shock test instead passed that test, right? So you just failed it, and you just go, well, I'm going to spend a CP that I have, and boom, there we're good. Now, command points aren't as common as they were in 9th edition, right? So you really had to kind of think about whether it was worth it to spend the command point on the unit that failed, if you even had it available to spend, honestly, because you might not. But it was a thematic way to rally your troops after they failed their battle shock test. Now, after these most recent changes, it's a stratagem that you need to decide to use before you roll for battle shock on a unit, not in response to failing battle shock. So instead of rolling to see if you succeeded and then spending the points if you didn't, now you have to choose whether you want to spend the point to auto-succeed or leave it up to chance. Like that's a significant kind of change, but there's more. Before, you could do it in the game as many times as you had opportunity and command points to spend. Now, you can only do it once per game, and only if you have the command points. These are a couple of big changes in the balanced data slate, and the concern is that this will continue, and we'll see other changes like this and more in a few more months, and maybe more after that, and then potentially some more even after that. This constant change can cause big issues to the game and to its player base. When the game rules are perceived as a constantly moving target, that problem is known to drive many players away, partially because of the rules constantly changing and also due to the points cost and how they impact a player's, ability to build a list. As to list building, I want to kind of put a note in here. Games Workshop announced sometime around the beginning of August that the Battleforge Army Builder portion of the 40K app was going to eventually only be available to subscribers of the Warhammer Plus streaming service thingy, effectively behind a paywall. We knew it would eventually be behind some kind of paywall. They told that to us right up front, but when they said it's Warhammer Plus, I personally thought that this was a pretty bad idea, and I made a video about it. Pachow. And now it doesn't exactly seem to be 100% true. It's recently come out that the Battleforge portion of the app, where you build your lists for your armies, will still be available for everyone, but you'll only be able to build and save one army at a time. If you want to, let's say, build a new army list, then you'll have to delete the current one that you have in the app, right? You can only have one in progress at a time. Now, I'm not sure if this was the plan all along, and they just kind of didn't mention it initially to hopefully drive more people to Warhammer Plus, who thought that they were going to totally lose the army building within the app. Or maybe this was just a response to the backlash that came out after the announcement. Nonetheless, the Battleforge section of the 40K app is probably the easiest way to keep track of all your constantly shifting points costs now, and I'm not sure if that's by design or not. Honestly, I'm not sure who is to benefit from these constant updates, right? Like, somebody must be benefiting, generally. Initially, I kind of assumed it was Games Workshop listening to the competitive crowd, but the competitive crowd, when looked at as a whole, right, will never be completely happy with any changes, right? Someone will always feel slighted when their unit gets nerfed or whatever. And 2, there's not much money actually in the competitive scene for Games Workshop. Also, on the opposite end, the casual players aren't really benefiting from these constant changes either. If you're very casual, right, you're probably just ignoring these changes completely, unintentionally or not. If you're, like casual but keep up with the 40K news, then you probably know that there's been updates and then probably have to think about checking for updates like every single time you play if you don't play, weekly or anything like that. And if you're in the process of building an army and working towards playing soon, these constant updates of points and rules can be very daunting. At the beginning of 10th edition, I became enamored with Combat Patrol, and I still am. Partially because the only changes so far that have affected my Combat Patrol experience are the changes to the core rules in the balanced data slates. The several points changes so far that have been coming out, for 40K, they don't affect Combat Patrol, which is nice. However, my plan was to expand several of my combat patrols into 1,000 point armies. I was going to do a 1,000 point list for Blood Angels and Astra Militarum based off of my combat patrols that are in progress. I was also planning a 1,000 point list of Space Marines using models that I had built but never painted from way back in 8th edition when Primaris Marines first came out, right? I was building this list and was going to do a thing for 8th edition and all that stuff. And then when 9th edition 40K came along, I dipped out. You know, I didn't enjoy the rules, and those Space Marines, they went into a box. During the exciting days of the 10th edition launch, I dug them out and started list building with, you know, what I had built there in the box. All I'd need to do would be to build a Primaris captain, add it to the list, and I'd have another 1,000 point list, 3 of them planned in total. And now, barely 3 months later, I'd say that the probability for me to have a finished 1,000 point Astra Militarum list is maybe a 75% chance of actually happening, right? The combat patrol for that army is something I've been painting on Twitch, and I'm close to done. That will 100% happen, because it's combat patrol, right? But extending it out to a full 1,000 points, like I said, 75, maybe 80% chance. And the Blood Angels and the Space Marines lists, very low percentages. Dependent upon the Codex release for them both, that will have some sort of sway on how these things go. At least with the Guard, I won't have to worry about a Codex for a few years, at least. All of these changes, especially early on like this, can really fracture the player base and also really dissuade new players or returning players who are trying to figure out, you know, a game and figure out lists for the game, right? You know, I mean, hopefully most new players are sticking with Combat Patrol, you know, as then the goalposts aren't moving much other than the changes to the core rules once in a while. If you're thinking about getting into 40K and all this change sounds scary, get yourself a Combat Patrol box that looks cool to you, download the PDF for the list, and just start building. Hopefully this is a situation of growing pains, for lack of a better term, right? These kind of frequent changes will come at the beginning of this edition to maybe fix some problems that the game designers believe to be, you know, specifically very egregious. And maybe now that these changes are made, they'll back off with the tweaks and the modifications every month, you know? Maybe like yearly tweaks? That would be good. Maybe 6 months? I don't know. It's better to look at the fence post than the ground when plowing a field, is a quote I've always heard, meaning it's better to keep heading towards the goal than to constantly make small kind of self-corrections and stuff like that. And I'm hoping that Games Workshop listens. So what do you think? Do you think that this is a good thing? Games Workshop being more proactive than ever before when it comes to rules balance for their flagship game? Or is this too much kind of fidgeting and adjusting with the rules that's driving new and old players alike away from the system due to all that unpredictability? I've got my opinions, but what's yours? Let me know in the comments down below. If you liked this video and you want to see more kinds of opinion pieces like this, you know, hit that like button down there, get some little fireworks or confetti. It's hard to say, but it does really help. Subscribe if you want to see more, and thanks for watching.